Well, you're on Finweek Money Matters. Recent metals and engineering production figures released by Stats SA show that the industry remains in trouble. Production declining by nearly 7% in the first quarter compared with the same period in 2015. More than 11,000 jobs lost in the sector last year. And we've also seen the closure of Highveld Steel, or Evraz as it became known. Historically, that was the country's second biggest steel mill. Joining us in studio to talk about the outlook for the sector is Henk Langenhoven, Chief Economist at CIFSA, that's the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation, and Finweek contributor Kieran Ryan. Henk, let's start with you. CIFSA, it's a long-established body. As a body, and perhaps you yourself, you've seen a lot of change in this industry. Things are bad. How bad are they?
They are 30% below 2007, and it seems as if we're moving in a band that is just not improving, and renewed weakness at the moment, as your figures that you just quoted said. So losing last year, we contracted by about 3%. We lost 11,000 people. This year, we were hoping that it won't be worse than that. But at the moment, if you take the 12 months up to, I think April numbers are out, then we are at -5. We hope that it will recover. The PMI just came out now, just before we got here. Little bit better. It'll have to keep on improving for the trend to change, and then only will the sector itself, the production numbers, improve, and then employment opportunities.
Some of the information provided to me linked to this article in Finweek. If everyone's output was dropping, that would be one thing. But some of the stats here is that our output has dropped 20% since 2007, so that's nearly 10 years. But there's been a 68% jump in Chinese production. So yes, it's our share of global output that's shrinking, not just the amount of steel we're producing. That's worrying.
That is worrying, and our share of our South African market has been dropping from about 68% in 2002 to 48%, which is just in round terms, the sector is about 530 billion rands worth of production. That is 100 billion that we've lost in the share of the South African market. The irony is the South African market has grown over that period, but the South African producers have lost a large proportion of their share of that market. And incidentally, that's 70,000 people. That could have been in the system, everything else being equal, that are now -30,000.
Kieran, as a journalist from the outside looking into this industry, what's the problem and what should we be doing about it?
Well, I think the steel industry has got particular problems. It's the main support for the steel industry is construction, it's the automobile industry, and it's mining. Mining is pretty much dying on its feet at the moment. And at the Metals Indaba a few weeks ago, Peter Major from Cadres, he mentioned that there's 2,000 pieces of legislation that the miners have had to contend with since 1994. I mean, that sector is drowning in regulation and red tape. It's just been strangled. By way of contrast, you look at Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. If you want a sort of prediction of where South Africa is going to go, look at them, because they had a dead mining industry 15, 20 years ago, and they decided they were going to revitalize it. What do? They made it business friendly. They wanted to attract investment, and their mining investment is pouring in there. It's not coming to South Africa. We haven't sunk a shaft in South Africa in 10 years. At one time, we used to produce nearly half the world's gold. We're producing 5% at the moment. We're a minnow in world terms.
Well, gold is a finite resource. Steel is much less finite. I mean, we should be making more of it. But Henk, what also strikes me is that, think of Highveld Steel, then became Evraz. We had ArcelorMittal, which was, of course, Iscor. Now, Iscor began as a great state enterprise, which was then listed and was a giant of the South African economy. Highveld Steel is part of Anglo-American. These were two. It was unthinkable that either of these two could come under threat. Now, imports, cheap imports, is one thing that's changed in the environment.
Absolutely, and the other part of it is the part that you mentioned about China being such a large producer in the world. That, of course, also changed. Now, the link between the two is actually the trade and policy, trade policy and tariff policies that happened. And with good motivation, it was necessary to drop some of our tariffs, but it probably dropped too far. And Warren Buffett says, if the tide goes out, you see who's naked. And that happens. We came from a protected environment, both sanctions and the tariffs that we imposed ourselves, taken away almost simultaneously. and China was not a factor, and their production increased dramatically. I mean, they have nearly 2/3 of the world production capacity, and flooded the world with.
Of course, what's interesting here is the role of states in different economies. So China is very much a state involvement in the economy. What South Africa did, Kieran, I mean, I think in the 1990s, they dropped all agricultural tariffs, so threw the agricultural sector open. Other sectors have been quite protected and subsidized. There's no consistency. Now, the automotive sector, you mentioned briefly a moment ago. Now, that's been doing quite well, but it's very complex, the government's support for that industry. A lot of these manufacturers perhaps wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the complex tax and subsidy arrangement that they have. I mean, are we actually paying more for them to be here than they are generating in terms of wealth? Is it worth having this support?
Well, I think the question, I'm pretty sure we are, paying a fairly substantial amount to have them here. What is the cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah.
That's a bit of an open question. But the motor industry in this country has always had some form of protection. Same with ISCOR. You mentioned ISCOR. That was taxpayer funded.
Yeah.
And we decided we were going to be an industrial economy. The steel industry grew out of mining. But what was the primary industry here was mining, and out of that grew steel, and out of that grew automotive. So I think at the moment about half of the steel offtake is going towards automotive, and that actually is a success. If you look back 10 years ago, we were producing about 300,000 cars. Now we're doing in excess of 600,000, half of which is being exported. The value of exports last year was 150 billion, and proof that the sector is pretty successful. And this is the government support program. It's called the Automotive Development Production, APDP.
Yes, it always has to be 4 letters. The previous one was the Motor Industry
MIDP, which is Motor Industry Development Program, yeah. And then at that time, of course, it was based on local content, which in turn was based on weight. So we had the heaviest cars in the world. And now we have, it's worked on basically your export value. But it is an export success, and we've got 22 car manufacturers in this country, and what they want in order to invest in this country is that they have certainty of policy.
Yep.
So they want to know for the next 10 years that government's not going to move the goalposts, so that they can invest in safety.
Well, generally, the motor industry has had that. Although they've changed the rules, it's been negotiated carefully. It's been done in an orderly, regulated way. People have known what's going on. Henk, what should be done in this steel industry? Because what strikes one as well is that if you let the market forces go and you don't have too much in the way of protection, you could have an industry that goes under.
Absolutely.
That actually closes. So the country doesn't have its own steel capacity. And who knows what happens in the world? And maybe you can't import steel from somewhere else and you can't make your own anymore.
Yeah. Look, the benefit is we have a live example in Australia where exactly this happened. You're asking what can be done. A similar type of thing that happened in the auto sector. A different approach, I think. A cluster approach. Understand where the problems are, what the limitations are, what the niche markets are, and try and set policy towards that. If you go a little bit deeper into the sector is composed of about 7 different industries. Starting at the primary and going down to electrical machinery equipment. These equipments that you see here, some of the components are made here. And setting policy that looks at its unique problems and benefits and let it go that way. The idea that you can try and influence an input price at the top of the pipeline and hope to get the benefits down the line, I think has proven to be not possible or very unlikely. And secondly, in an unstable world like the commodities, I said to Kieran outside, if you talk about 50% up and 60% down and 40% up and 50% down, and what is a developmental price? So the certainty, I think, is the key, focused on the uniqueness of the different components. And we, for example, can make at the same price, benchmarked internationally, optic fiber and all sorts of cables. But it has to grow out of the domestic market.
I mentioned ISCOR, and then ISCOR and Sasol were the 2 great state enterprises that were privatized successfully. And then, of course, all that was put on hold, unfortunately. But has it been a good thing, Kieran, that Sasol just developed? ISCOR became a different company in South Africa, and then it was taken over by a foreign shareholder.
Yeah.
Has that been good for South Africa, to have a foreign shareholder with a global operation, which might say, that the South African operation is no longer part of its plan, therefore close it?
That's a debatable point. There is a school of thought in this country that perhaps we shouldn't be in primary liquid steel production. In other words, we shouldn't have an ArcelorMittal because it relies on such extensive support from the state. I think there's another question. If you look at the privatization of Sasol and Escort, did the taxpayer who funded that, did they get any benefit? No. What benefit are we getting today? Well, you could say if we're going to be an industrial economy, then we have to provide some level of protection. And let's not be unreal about this. It's happening all over the world. Every country is protecting its industry. So there is a move worldwide towards protectionism. Look at Donald Trump and what he's doing in the United States.
Well, it just looks like our policy is inconsistent and they are scratching the surface of the issues. That was Henk Langenhoven, Chief Economist at the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of South Africa, CIFSA, and Finweek contributor Kieran Ryan. And that's all from this week's edition of Finweek Money Matters. See you again, same time next week.